Why do you view murder, theft, adultery, and other things as wrong? All right, so yeah, that's a very good question. So it's a question of ethics and values. And so how do we know what's right or wrong? And throughout the history of humanity, we've had these back and forth debates on what makes something right, what makes something wrong. And what's interesting, if you study at an anthropological level, all the societies, all the cultures, and what systems of ethics they have, what's interesting is, yeah, you'll have little points of disagreement, but you get vast, vast, vast agreement on what's right and what's wrong. But how do we determine what's right or wrong? So obviously there's enough information to work out what we would want is right or wrong. And it's, again, a cumulative sort of thing. They're things that all add up. They help us work out what's right or wrong. But in the end, it comes down to who we trust the most to work out what's right or wrong. So it's interesting. It's a question of trust again, right or wrong. So do we trust ourselves to decide what's right for ourselves right now? And right now, I think that's where Western society is. So right now, I get to determine what's right for myself. And right now in the West, we would say things like, as long as it's two mature, consenting adults done in the privacy of your own home, that's okay, as long as no one's getting hurt. So we would use criteria like that. As long as no one's getting hurt would be criteria. So that's something I come up for myself. But the whole problem is this is a very recent Western phenomenon. So how do I know that whether or not I should privilege my Western individual ethics over other versions of ethics in other societies and other cultures? So, and often I myself get things wrong, don't I? And often I act out of selfishness rather than out of goodness, for example. So should it be me, the individual, that decides what right or wrong? So some people say, no, we should make it collective society. Collective society gets to determine what's right or wrong. And then that helps. That's very helpful. And more often than not, we get it right. But every now and then, collective society does get it wrong. So we look at apartheid South Africa and we think, they probably got it wrong. Just 40 years ago in Australia, we had a White Australia policy. And we would say they probably got that wrong. And just to give you an example, I was listening to the ABC and they were interviewing an Australian customs official about the White Australia policy. That only got wiped out in the early 1970s. And this guy said, you've got to understand the White Australia policy made it so hard for us. You know, we can only let white people in Australia, but non-white people couldn't come into Australia. So for the Western Europeans, that was easy. They were white. They got in. For the Asians and the Africans, that was easy. They're not white. They don't get in. What made it hard for us were the Mediterraneans. Are they white or are they non-white? And he said, well, what we used to do was pretend to give them a medical examination. We'll make them take off their clothes, and if they had a tan line, they were white, and they got in. And if they didn't have a tan line, they weren't white, and they didn't get in Australia. And he himself said that, he was horrified that they once used to do this in Australia, only 40 years ago. And that means collective society does get things wrong, and every now and every generation comes and looks back at the last generation and goes, we did what? We believed what? And so we wouldn't want to privilege society then as our ultimate authority of what makes right or wrong. So that leads some people to suggest, well, maybe it's nature, the natural world. So whatever we see in nature, whatever is natural, should be right or wrong. And there's a lot that's helpful there. But there are things in nature that even then we say we wouldn't want to impose that on the human society. You know, so there's an insect that settles on a frog's head and then just sucks its brain out and watches it slowly die. And that's how it lives. I think, I wouldn't want to make that normative for the human race. You know, the black widow has sex with a male and then eats him after sex. And you think, I wouldn't want to make that the normative right or good for the human race. So it means we can't use everything in nature to decide what's right or wrong either. So then it comes down to, okay, if you don't want the individual to have the ultimate say, you don't want collective society to have the ultimate say, you don't want nature to have the ultimate say, well, maybe it comes down to the question of, do we believe there's a God who we can trust to tell us what's right or wrong? So in all these questions of ethics, it's really not a question of, well, what's right or wrong? Why do you think murder's wrong? Defend it. That's actually not the question. The question behind the question is, can we trust that there's a loving, personal God who made us, who knows us best, and we defer to his authority to tell us what's right or wrong? And then the Bible says, yes, we can trust this God because he loves us, he speaks to us, and he died for us. So it comes down to, it's like parenting children. So we've got 2 little boys, Toby and Cooper, 3 and 1, third boy on the way. And my wife and I, we're making this up as we go. Okay, two little kids. So we're always going to parenting seminars, reading parenting books, like help, and then they all almost say the same thing. If you want your kids to behave, if you want your kids to be controlled, it's not how hard you punish them, it's not how much you do this to them, it's how much they trust you. So you've got to demonstrate that you love them and you love each other. So that the guy and the woman in a loving, trusting relationship with each other, and we have a loving, trusting relationship with the children, and then they will do what's right or wrong. And that's what the question comes down to. Can we trust that there's a God who loves us, that we're going to listen to what he says?